Thank you for tuning in to the Behavioral Wealth Consulting Podcast, where our mission is to help you change your behavioral decisions by improving your financial literacy. If you want to live a more fulfilling life and get on track towards your long-term financial goals, it requires changing behaviors, developing a plan, and prioritizing your financial decisions. Now to your host and certified personal finance consultant, Richard Maricut.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today for episode 12. I am your host, Richard Maricut, where my goal is to help you change your behavioral decisions by improving your financial literacy. Before we get started, just a reminder, I am not a financial advisor, and this is for informational use only. Always consult with your own financial advisor before making any financial decisions, of course, based on your situation. So for today's two-part series, I'm actually going to be reviewing an article called The 20 Financial Mistakes That 30-Year-Olds Regret the Most. This was published by a website called fitzvillafuerte.com. Now, the article says 30-year-olds, but after reviewing this list, I'd have to say that a lot of these apply to the 40 and older group as well. So the article starts by saying that the writer asked the question, what financial mistakes do you regret the most? And he asked this question to some of his close friends, ex-office mates, high school and college friends. And the list is basically their top answers. Now, if you find yourself committing, some of these same mistakes, then you may want to consider correcting them before it's too late, or you find yourself regretting some of these decisions yourself later down the line. So let's get into it. So the first three items are covered under the section of saving and spending mistakes. So number one is I regret not learning how to budget my money early. And he goes on to say, I used to spend my income on whatever I want because I live with my parents. But now that I'm living on my own, I'm finding it hard to budget my money to pay for my rent and other living expenses. If I had learned to budget early on, I know I wouldn't be having this many difficulties. Right. So I think that's an important one. One of the things that I've shared on previous podcasts is that, we often learn our spending habits or our money habits through people we know. A lot of times it's family and close friends. So when you are picking up those habits early on and your friends and family may not be in the financial situation that you want to move into, then it makes sense that you're going to pick up those habits, right? Now, of course, every situation you can reflect and say, were they bad habits or you just didn't know enough, right? But I think this was a good way to start off is that, a lot of us in our early years, we are somewhat sheltered, right? So in this example, he mentioned he lived with his parents. So naturally, any money that he was probably making or she was probably making was going to what the individual wants to buy as opposed to trying to plan, right? Number two, I wish I didn't procrastinate on building an emergency fund. And he goes on to say, in my 20s, I assigned my credit cards as my emergency fund. That was a big mistake. If only I'd got into the habit of saving early, I know I wouldn't be in so much credit card debt now. And again, I've spoken about emergency funds again on previous shows where, unless you, before you can start investing, it's important that you have enough money on the side to be able to take care of, anywhere from 3 to 6 months of your normal expenses. All right. In case an unplanned event happens, you want to be able to sustain your livelihood, especially of that of your family. If you have a family, you want to make sure that you have enough cash on reserves or liquid cash to get to until you're able to reestablish your source of income. But for me personally, in my younger days, especially in my 20s, I didn't think about that. It was just about spending as soon as I got it, right? So this is one I can definitely agree with. If I would have taken the time to pay myself first, establish that emergency fund or savings account, definitely could prevent a lot of headache down the line. Number 3, I regret spending like there's no tomorrow. And he goes on to say, I spent during payday like it was Christmas. It was nice and fun at first, but after a few years, regret suddenly comes when you hear friends quitting their jobs and starting their own businesses while you're stuck at being an employee with no savings. And, that just kind of goes on to what I was just saying is, from my experience, I wasn't thinking about tomorrow. And again, this is not uncommon, especially, if you're single, or early 20s, maybe even early 30s, right? You're not thinking about tomorrow, you're thinking about the moment. And if your circle of friends or family are, also living that lifestyle of in the moment, you're not necessarily thinking about tomorrow. So you get paid and then you spend, right? Number 4, now we move into debt mistakes. So number 4 is, I regret going into credit card debt. And he goes on to say, treating credit cards as free money was the biggest financial mistake I did. I had to quit a good paying job to save face. Back then, collection agencies were calling my office, and it was embarrassing to my colleagues and especially to my boss. Now, going into credit card debt, again, most of us, especially in our younger age, we can get pulled into, these marketing advertisements where it's, 0% interest for X amount of months. And early on, that builds that habit of, almost no accountability. You get to use a physical piece of plastic to charge things that you want, and you don't have to pay for it or even think about how you're going to pay for it at the moment. And that convenience is what ends up getting a lot of us in trouble, especially early on when you haven't built the financial behaviors to control that. It's enticing to be able to pull out a card and purchase something, not having to worry about the responsibility at that moment. And I think that's what ends up getting a lot of us in trouble, is that repetitive pattern of adding more debt to debt to debt, on top of that, higher interest payments. And then, if you miss one payment, now your interest rate skyrockets. That's also a form of the education that you don't get is, what does it mean when you miss a payment? Most of us use credit cards and tie the responsibility of payment just to understanding, well, what's the minimum payment? And the thought is, if I can afford the minimum payment, then I will pay that as long as I can. And then what happens? You end up getting additional credit cards, and then that minimum payment across, 3, 4, 5 cards now becomes, $200, $300, $400 a month that you're paying on top of the accruing interest that happens. So definitely agree with this number 4. Number 5, I wish I didn't learn how to borrow money from friends. He goes on to say, I was blessed with generous friends whom I can always borrow money from. They won't charge me interest and would even let me pay whenever I can. I'm no longer friends with them. They started to ignore me when they found out I usually spend the money to go out on weekends. This is a scenario that thankfully I never had to experience, depending on friends for money. But I have heard the stories of this, right? Where, you're a kind-hearted person, you lend money to someone and then they don't pay you back. But then you see that they're still spending or going out, on the weekends as this example shared. And then so you start to question, the friendship, right? How is this person able to go out and spend money knowing that this person still owes me what I lent him or her? And this can often cause separation, not only with friends, but even with family members, right? And that's when it can be somewhat awkward and also long-term damage. Number 6, lifestyle mistakes. Number 6 says, I now realize that keeping up with fads and trends was pointless. And it goes on to say, I used to spend money, or all of my money, on the latest fashion trends, the newest mobile phones. After years of doing this, I now have a closet of outmoded clothes, a pile of obsolete gadgets, and no savings in the bank. And, this one I can definitely relate to, and as I'm sure a lot of us can. With so much social media now feeding us the coolest thing, the coolest trend, what you should have in order to be, quote unquote, cool or current, it forces us or makes us feel that we're forced to keep up with that. And that often comes with, spending more beyond your means, just trying to keep up, whether it's the new iPhone, the new Android, the newest pair of shoes, right? The outfit, again, keeping up with your circle of friends or your environment. And most of the time, they're probably having a hard time keeping up with that as well. But then you get into the cycle that you feel like you have to have those things in order to stay current or relevant, and that ends up coming back and biting you back for a long period of time. Number 7, I regret upgrading my lifestyle beyond what I could afford. And he goes on to say that, one time he got an increase from his boss at his job. The next day he enrolled in a gym membership that was pretty much slightly above the increase that he received from his job. And then he goes on to say, who in the right mind would do that? And just to think that at that time he was an engineering major, right? So, with this example, it's kind of often known as lifestyle creep, right? So when you come into new money, whether it's a lump sum, a gift, or in this example, a pay increase at your job, you now feel this moment of being able to afford more, right? Just because you got the increase or the lump sum. Now, rather than using that increase and maintaining your same lifestyle, you now increase your lifestyle to accommodate for that increase. And, in this example, he used getting a gym membership, and that's probably small in comparison to some examples that I know I've done, and some of you may have done, which is, maybe getting a new car or adding a car payment, upgrading to a new house, even though your current house has been doing fine. Right? So you're adding additional spending because you got that recent increase, but oftentimes your new spending is more than what your increase was, therefore creating more of a additional debt. And we're not thinking about that at the moment, but again, lifestyle creep is probably one of the ones that keeps us in our current financial situation for a lot longer, even though our annual income increases. It always feels like we're living paycheck to paycheck, right? And you probably heard that, and you probably said that yourself, right? I feel like I'm living paycheck to paycheck, but then you look back the last 5 years, you've had maybe a $15,000 to $20,000 increase in your income in the last 5 years, but it still feels like you're living check to check, or maybe you actually are living check to check. But when you look at how you've upgraded your lifestyle to accommodate that increase over the years, that's what keeps you in your same situation. Number 8, I wish I didn't ignore the reality of inflation. Now, this one's been getting a lot of attention recently, especially post-COVID. A lot of the money that was being pumped into the economy last year to keep, people updated and current with spending, a lot of money was pumped into the system. And he goes on to say here, I get at least a 10% salary increase every year. while according to reports, the inflation is around 4, the 6%, right? So basically, in this example, is like if you're getting a minimum salary increase, and 10% is pretty high compared to what I've traditionally seen as a normal increase can be anywhere from 2 to 5% in most companies. But if the inflation is at a minimum the same or exceeding that, then are you really getting an increase enough to offset inflation, right? Now, of course, inflation is broad because inflation may not impact everybody exactly the same way, because there can be periods or years where certain products are more expensive, but not everybody may purchase those same things, so it may not be felt the same way. But again, the point of number 8 is realizing that each year the value of the dollar decreases as prices of goods goes up. Number 9 is income and career mistakes. He goes on to say, I wish I didn't become complacent with having my salary as my only source of income. He says, I used to think I was a valuable employee and had a long career ahead of me in the company that I was at. That was until they decided to cut costs and had to let me go, thinking that my job was secure and I could live the rest of my life as a salary earner was the biggest financial mistake of my life. And this one, again, this is one that most of us, even going back to our parents and grandparents, right? We were taught to, go to school, get a good job, and then you spend, the next 40, 50 years there, and then you get to retire, living off that one income. But, I would say probably in the last 20 years, that's become less and less, where people are living that kind of career at a single company, because there's so much more change that's happening now compared to, our times our great grandparents or grandparents were, right? But it still comes back down to the fact that there's so many other ways that you can generate income. I know the popular term is side hustles, but I really look at it as just utilizing your talents, to earn extra income. And again, my reference to social media, now there's a lot of ways that you can make additional money through, even being at home, right? Using the power of social media. So again, number 9 is, not being complacent with one salary, always looking for opportunity to generate more money. The key to that is, you want to have more coming in than what's going out. So of course, budgeting becomes very critical there. And number 10, I regret not starting a business when I had the chance. He says, I'm now married with kids and cannot easily quit my job to start a business. Looking back, I wish I had the courage to go into entrepreneurship when I was still single and living with my parents, because I could afford to take a higher risk back then. And again, for my example, being in early 40s, now having a family, I could relate to this one. But I would also say, don't let your age stop you, or having a family stop you. Yes, it means that you have to be a little bit more strategic. You need to make sure that you have safety measures in place. But if you have that instinct to become an entrepreneur, or you have skill sets that you want to broaden out, I think that you can make those things happen while still taking calculated risk without jeopardizing the livelihood of your family, right? I think, again, it just takes more planning, but I think it definitely can be done. All right, so that takes us to number 10 of the top 20. That's it for today's podcast. I'll be getting into number 11 and 20 in the next episode, so stay tuned. Also, if you enjoyed today's session, I'd appreciate giving me a positive rating on whichever podcast platform you are listening on. It definitely helps me get my message out to more users to help improve their financial literacy. And if you need help on how to get started to improving your own financial literacy, or need some structure on how to get started with budgeting, visit our website at www.behavioralwealthconsulting.com for more information. And if you'd like to hear more about a specific topic on future episodes, you can email us at behavioralwealthconsulting@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Behavioral Wealth Consulting podcast. For more information on how we can help you design an effective financial strategy through behavioral changes, visit us at behavioralwealthconsulting.com.